9. The library. All across the district, the Dow and pumpkins were like a great army, marching to save us from certain death. Of course, our lives wouldn't return to normal until the harvest, which was still 2 months away. And at night, the same blob of enzima greeted us at supper, but at least we had the start of something better. In the trading center, people began to smile and talk about the future. As the district slowly reclaimed its energy, students at Cachacolo returned to school to resume their studies, but since my parents still couldn't afford my fees, I was forced to stay home. Besides some weeding, there was little work to do in the fields until harvest. I spent a lot of time in the trading center playing bawo. Someone also taught me a wonderful game called chess, which I played every day. But these games weren't enough to keep my mind stimulated. I needed a better hobby, something to trick my brain into being happy. Day and night, all I could think about was school. I missed it terribly. Then I remembered that a small library had opened the previous year in Wimby Primary. It was started by a group called the Malawi Teacher Training Authority, and all the books were donated by the American government. Perhaps reading would keep my brain from getting mushy. The library was housed in a small room by the main office. I entered and was greeted by a nice lady who smiled and said, "Come to borrow some books?" This was Ms. Edith Sikello, who taught English and Social Studies at Wimby and acted as the school librarian. I nodded, then asked, "How do I do it?" It was my first time ever seeing such a thing. Ms. Sikello pulled back a curtain to reveal 3 giant shelves that nearly reached the ceiling, each filled with books. The air smelled sweet and musty, an aroma I'd find comforting from that day forward. She explained the rules of borrowing books, then showed me the many titles available. I expected to find primary readers and other boring Malawian textbooks, but to my surprise, these books came from all over the world, places like America and England, Zimbabwe and Zambia. I saw books on English, history, and science, even novels for leisurely reading. I spent hours that morning sitting on the floor, flipping through pages and marveling at the pictures. For the first time in my life, I experienced what it felt like to escape without going anywhere. The books from other countries were especially fascinating, but I ended up checking out the same Malawian textbooks my friends were studying at school. It was the end of the semester, and my plan was to get caught up before classes started again. Back at home, I fashioned a hammock from flour sacks and strung it between 2 trees. I spent my mornings at the library, and during the warm afternoons, I read in the shade. Right away, Gilbert offered to help with my independent studies. Each day after school, he stopped by and explained the lessons. "What did you cover in science?" I asked. "Weather patterns." "Can I get your notes?" "For sure." But as much as I loved to read, I found it terribly difficult. For one, my English was bad, and sounding out words took a great deal of time and energy. Plus, some of the material was confusing since I didn't have a teacher to explain things. "In agriculture," I asked Gilbert, "what do they mean by weathering?" "It's when rain breaks apart the rocks and soil." "Oh, got it." One Saturday, Gilbert and me met at the library just to look at books for fun. We couldn't study all the time. The first thing I spotted was the Malawi Junior Integrated Science book, used by the older high school students. Inside it were lots of diagrams and photos of strange and interesting things. People with rabies and children stricken with kwashiorkor, like so many who'd wandered our country. One picture showed a man in a puffy silver suit. "What's happening here?" I asked. "It says he's walking on the moon," Gilbert said. "Impossible." Turning the pages, I saw a photo of Nkula Falls on the Shire River, located in southern Malawi. It's where the Eskom operated the hydro plant I mentioned earlier, and where the country got its electricity. The only information I had was that the river flowed downhill until it reached the plant. Then, poof, there was power. How and why this worked, I had no clue. But this book explained everything. It said that the water turned a giant wheel at the plant called a turbine, and the turbine produced the electricity. "Well," I told Gilbert, "this sounds exactly like the bicycle dynamo. It lights the bulb by also turning a wheel." The photo of Nkulu Falls made me think about the dambo behind my house. During the rainy season, there was always a waterfall. "What if I put a dynamo underneath it?" I said. "The falling water could do the spinning and produce electricity? We could listen to the radio whenever we wanted." The only problem would be running wires all the way to my house, which would cost a fortune. And what would I do the rest of the year when the marsh was just a soggy swamp? I guess I'll have to research this a little more, I said. Later that day, we came across another fascinating book called Explaining Physics. It was also filled with photos and illustrations, mainly from England. To my surprise, it answered many of the questions I had been asking for a long time, such as how engines burned gasoline in order to move, or how CD players read the music on that shiny disc. For those of you wondering the same, it uses a laser beam. I found an entire section on batteries. Another photo demonstrated how brakes on a car worked. I'd always assumed that the car used strips of rubber to stop the wheels like on a bicycle. This book said otherwise. Vacuum brakes, I said? Wow, Gilbert, I really need to borrow this book. But Explaining Physics was way more difficult to read than Integrated Science. The words and phrases were long and complicated and not always easy to translate. After a while, I devised my own system by reading words in context. For example, if I was interested in a photo or an illustration labeled Figure 10, and I didn't know what it meant, I'd comb through the text until I found where Figure 10 was mentioned. Then I'd study all the words and sentences around it, often asking Ms. Sichello to look them up in a dictionary. Can you look up the word voltage, I asked. Sure. Any others? Resistor. Oh, and diode. Slowly, this is how I began learning English, as well as the science that would soon capture my imagination. After a couple of weeks of reading this book, I came across the most amazing chapter, the discussion of magnets. I knew a little about magnets because they're found in radio speakers. I'd busted off a few and taken them to school as toys, moving slivers of metal around through a piece of paper. The book explained how all magnets have north and south poles. The north pole of one magnet will stick to the south pole of another, while identical poles always resist. You've probably experienced this yourself when playing around with these things. In fact, the Earth itself has liquid iron core that acts like a giant bar magnet in relation to its poles. Magnets, like Earth, have natural force fields that radiate between the poles. The south end of a bar magnet will always be pulled toward the north pole of the Earth. That's how a compass works. The bar magnet inside always pulls north to keep you from getting lost. The most fascinating section was about electromagnets, which worked by applying power to a coil of wire. According to the book, you can make them out of everyday objects such as nails and batteries. When electricity from a power source, such as a battery, passes through a coil of wire, it creates a magnetic field. This magnetic field can be even greater if the wire is wrapped around a good conductor, like a nail. The more it's wrapped, the stronger the electromagnet. The strength can also be increased by using thicker wire or by applying more power. The book showed giant electromagnets picking up cars and heavy pieces of metal, but smaller ones, it explained, help power simple motors and things like radios and car alternators. Aha! I said aloud, they're talking about radios. I was sitting in my hammock when I read this piece of information. It had taken me over a month to get this far in the chapter, mainly because of all the strange English words to learn. But now I'd reached the juiciest part. How do these motors work? Well, in a simple electric motor, a coil of wire on a shaft sits inside a casing that's actually a large magnet. I knew this much by taking apart radio motors and unraveling the copper wire, mainly to make toys and stuff. When this coil of wire is connected to a battery or any power source, it becomes magnetized. It gets all charged up and wants to fight with the larger magnets surrounding it. The push and pull between their opposing poles causes the shaft to spin. You know the fans that we use in the summer to keep cool? The blades are spinning around and around because of this fight going on inside. During all this fighting and spinning around, these motors produce their own kind of energy called alternating current, or AC. There's a second kind of energy called direct current, or DC, but that's mostly found in batteries. Direct current flows in one direction from one end of the battery to the other, while AC changes direction and can be used in more ways. It's also easier to transmit. Because of this, most electronics use AC power. The book gave an example of an AC generating motor, a bicycle dynamo. Aha! I said again, remembering back when Jeffrey and I were playing with the dynamo and trying to power the radio. It didn't work when we'd attached the wires to the battery terminals, which only used direct current. But when we jammed them into the hole that said AC, the radio had come to life. The book went on. The movement of energy of the dynamo is provided by the rider. Of course, I thought. That's how the spinning motion generates power in a dynamo and in the ESCOM turbines on the river. I can't tell you how exciting this was for me. Even if the words and phrases sometimes confused me, the drawings were clear in my mind. It was like seeing an entirely new language composed of symbols, those for AC and DC, positive and negative.